Hi, everyone. I'm Dara Baldwin. I am a disability justice activist. I am a Black liberationist and abolitionist, and I am a debut author. My new book is To Be a Problem, a Black Woman's Survival in the Racist Disability Rights Movement, out in bookstores now. I was raised in Newark, New Jersey, Newark, like the airport, sorry, my accent. And that is a political city. Like, you can't live in Newark and not be involved in politics. And I also came from a family. My mother was a union person, also was a huge voting rights person. My grandfather, her father, would walk around. We would go to dinner, and he asked, "Are you registered to vote?" and pull out the pamphlet. And we're like, "Cops, we're trying to have dinner here." You know, he drove the bus on voter day for the church to make sure everybody got to vote. My mother worked the polls. So I come from that. I come from being liberation. I also come from protesting in the streets. As you know, Newark also is the center of the 68, 69 riots over the killing of a black person right by a police officer. And so that was my background. I was blessed to do work in corporate America, which I always thought, I was like, why am I in corporate America? And my mother and father, who were, public servants, were like, what is happening here? But I learned, you learn lessons when I came out of corporate America and came into actual social justice work, which I didn't know going to college you could be a public policy. Like, you don't see black public policy people. I think, I know I'm breaking ground with a lot of black women here in DC. We're firsts of doing, I'm first of doing disability policy. And so when I got my master's degree, I said, oh, I want to do public policy. I want to get out of the corporate world. I just couldn't do that. And so I got into public policy and what that meant to connect the activism in the street to actually changing policy and laws. And it's quite interesting and fascinating. And it is a rarity to be here in DC and be an activist who's in the streets, yelling at the man, but also be in the hallways of Congress, who's also creating and sitting and writing bills that become legislation that then have to be implemented through the Department of Justice, Department of Health and Human Services, whatever those are. And so that was my journey, and that is my journey. I'm still doing that, and it's a blessing to me because the people in those rooms, even though America is, we're very diverse, the Congress is still very white. The people who, even you see members of Congress, right, that is becoming more diverse, more women, we have LGBTQ, all of those things, but their staffers are not that. I'll talk about the disability rights community. Like the movement is fascinating. If you read about what they did and how they did it, it's quite fascinating. And they took a lot of their lead from the civil rights movement, from people like Bayard Rustin. And there is a person, Don Galloway. If you see the pictures, you'll see him, black man. Sometimes he has a cane, sometimes he has a service animal, a German Shepherd. He came from that movement, from the civil rights movement into the disability rights movement, but he's not championed. He's not talked about. It's the white people who are talked about all the time, as if they just, figured this out on their own, and it just came to them, and that's not true. But yes, the ADA, the whole entire movement of bringing people, activists from the community in the streets to the hallways of Congress to say, you are going to change our lives or we're not leaving here, is absolutely fantastic, right? It's how change happens in this country. So I believe that I truly, honestly have the utmost respect for those activists, but at the same time, I'm going to say, but you weren't the only ones, right? And that we have to make sure the history of black, indigenous people who were there, black and brown, people who were there, LGBTQ folks, they were formerly incarcerated folks who were there and in the room doing that. But the Americans with Disabilities Act also is only 34 years old. I mean, that says a lot. Like, listen to what that says, that disabled people did not get the right to vote in this country until 1990. So understand, right? Like, that's what that means. And that's only 34 years ago. And even now, there are barriers to them voting, but at least they have the civil, right? So yes, right, that's an ADA from the streets. Right, we want to cast a vote. There's still places that will now offer a voter registration to a blind person in Braille. So their voter registration has to be filled out by someone else, which is against HAVA, the Help America Vote Act, which says all of your voting and stuff is private, right? Like, no one should know
who you're voting for, what party you are, unless you want them to know. It is public record once you do it, but it's your choice, and they don't have that. And, cognitive skills, if you have a developmental disability, they were questioned, just like black folks were given a test. They were questioned, like, are you cognitive enough to vote? Do you know who, Barack Obama is? And do you know the Democratic Party? So they do that. And then, of course, the access to it, which is the main thing for the movement is, if you notice, your election booths are in churches and schools. And most churches in this country and most schools in this country were built before 1990, and they're not accessible. In jail, people who are in jail have the right to vote. People don't understand notice. So if you're in the city, go to them jails and do this, because give them the absentee ballot. Go and pick it up if you can, because it's hard for them to mail stuff out. So you have that. Anybody in an institution, anybody who's in a nursing home, who's in a group home, who's in a troubled teens facility, and they turn 18 by November 5th, they have the right to vote. And we forget that community. Foster care children, when they're turning 18, be there. You seniors, teachers and principals, check on those foster students and say, hey, are you 18 before November 5th? And make sure they have their registration to vote and get them to that poll so they can vote. You also have people who become United States citizens. It's a wonderful event. They get sworn in. It happens all over the country. And then we used to set up tables that once they took their oath, they came over to the table, registered those people to vote. That is a voting block. That's that plus, right? That is that, like us and plus. These are the plus that we have to get to and say, you have the right to vote, and we want you to cast that vote. So disabled people in those, usually that's who's in those institutions, they have the right to vote. And a lot of nursing home directors won't do it. They will not. They don't allow people to come in and register the people to vote. They don't allow people to come in and bring absentee ballots, but you can. If your grandmother and her friends are in a nursing home, go and register them to vote, and go and bring them their absentee ballots so that they can register, so that they can cast that vote. Especially black women. I know grandma, black woman in the nursing home or institution wants to cast that ballot. And so go and do and demand. Don't leave until you can give that person their absentee ballot, and you can stand there while they fill it out. You can take it from them and drop it in the mailbox for them or at the center for them. I want to say I do see change happening, and it's a wonderful thing, especially our young people. It's going to be and the young people who do this. But we really need to have some truth and reparations. Making sure that the black and brown disabled people who are leaders in this work are compensated for their work, just like the white disabled groups are. The white disabled groups are constantly swooping in and taking the funding, and it's really atrocious. And then saying that they're doing racial justice. I call it the dance for the finance. They write stuff and say, oh, I'm doing this intersectionality and we're working on racial justice, but they're not. And I feel like once we put, like I said, black disabled bodies issues at the center of what the barriers we want to remove, we remove theirs, we remove all, we remove everybody's barriers.